Do you like action games with big epic bosses? Do you like romantic stories with buckets of tragedy? Do you like your waifus a bit squeaky? Then let me tell you about Pandora's Tower, a Wii game developed by Gambarion and notably published by Nintendo in Japan and Europe, but not in the United States. The game caught the interest of Western gaming discourse together with Xenoblade and The Last Story, as a trio of Wii exclusives that were, for whatever reason, ignored by Nintendo of America. Fans of Japanese RPGs were a bit salty due to the pedigree, at least for the other two. Xenoblade was a big effort by the very talented Monolith, while The Last Story was developed by Mistwalker, a company founded by Hironobu Sakaguchi of Final Fantasy fame. So out came a fan campaign, Operation Rainfall, to kindly pester Nintendo of America to bring attention to these games and get them released in the States. As a fellow owner of a Wii that totally wasn't hacked, no sir, I could understand the frustration. I was also pretty excited for these games from the moment they were announced. And if you ask me, Pandora's Tower was the most interesting and the most unique of the three games. The good news is that Operation Rainfall was super effective, and eventually all three games got a proper release over in America. The bad news is that The Last Story wasn't all that great, and effectively buried Mistwalker in a sewage drain of mobile games, forcing them to fade away, like tears in the rain. The story kicks off in the kingdom of Illyria, where a girl called Elena was chosen as the songstress for this year's Harvest Festival. Midway through her performance, a strange mark appears on her back, and she suddenly transforms into a demon and starts wreaking havoc. After the dust settles down, she and her lover, our game's protagonist pretty boy Aaron, have no choice but to run away. A mysterious woman, Mafda, tells them that Elena has been struck with a curse, and if nothing is done, she will eventually transform into a monster. But there is hope. The old woman claims that the solution lies within the Scar, an otherworldly abyss where a giant fortress composed of 13 towers lies at the center. The curse can be reversed if she consumes the flesh of the serpent beasts living in the towers, but only for a time. To remove it permanently, she needs the premium stuff. Each of the towers is home to a master, a dangerous beast locked away by giant chains. And if Elena consumes their flesh, then she might be rid of the curse. So Aaron takes on the job of exploring the fortress and collecting the 12 nuggets, in the hopes that Elena can get rid of the fetish fuel on her back. If this summary sounds a bit rushed, that's because it is, by design. The intro intentionally omits many details about how everything came to this point, and avoids showing the entire series of events that occurred at the festival. Instead, details about the characters, the world, and the towers are slowly revealed as you progress. You'll see a number of flashbacks and also collect pieces of information about the lore. And the deeper you go into the rabbit hole, the more apparent it becomes how screwed up the outside world is. This game carries a heavy atmosphere pretty much everywhere except for the abandoned observatory that the trio moves to, serving as a makeshift home until they can solve their problem. But the game really likes its contrast between the comfy and the dark. So right outside your window you have this massive hole with a giant structure held up by 12 chains, almost as if it's preventing it from tearing the entire continent apart. Like, how does something like this even happen? And what connection does it have to Elena's curse? The towers themselves are also big and imposing, and the game does a great job at conveying that scale. Every time you enter, you're immediately walked down upon by a large statue of one of the gods of Ios, while a heavy orchestral tune plays in the background to set the tone. The documents scattered throughout the towers reveal that the army had some questionable plans for them, involving nasty scientific experiments and a reckless disregard of ethics and human life. Power-hungry fools tried to use the towers for their own purposes and ended up dooming the entire land. Meanwhile, there's war on the horizon. Illyria is currently at war with the neighboring kingdom of Athos, and the situation has entered a stalemate. Aaron and Elena are also both being hunted by the Illyrian army, one for the cock-up at the festival and the other for being a soldier from Athos accused of being a spy. So even if the curse is lifted, there's no home for them to return to. The situation feels hopeless. Or it would feel hopeless if you didn't have Elena to keep you company. More than war, mystery, or fantasy, Pandora's Tower is a game about companionship. It tells a very personal tale about the forbidden love of two people embroiled in a terrible situation, where everything and everyone is against them. Disney princess this ain't, there's no letting it go. This observatory is the only place in the world where you are safe, so you better get used to it. Put some decorations on it. Go do the laundry outside. Watch a bird lay a nest on the top floor. Sing your heart out. You've got beds, you've got water, and the nearby area is at least ripe for planting some flowers. Once the initial shock is gone, the mundane parts of life transform the observatory into something strangely comforting, because it's your special place. Whenever you go out into the towers, Elena is there to bid you good luck. Whenever you return to her side, she's there to greet you with a big smile and a big neck. You two are together, and that's the most important bit. There's a reason why this game is named after the story of Pandora's box, not that one, in which a curious woman named Pandora was given a box that should never be opened. But she did, and unleashed all the evils of the world. All that remained in the box was a single ray of light called hope. And that's the overarching vibe of this game. Despite all the hardships, there is hope that Elena and Aaron will get their happy ending. Of the game's 5 endings, the first 4 are all tragic to some degree, ranging from bittersweet at best to very grim at worst. And then there's ending S, which is the hardest one to achieve, but also the one that hits the hardest. It resolves all lingering plot threads, while ending everything on a positive note. The war ends, the curse is lifted, and the two lovers can finally live in peace. After hours of doom and gloom, seeing it all go right for Aaron and Elena is a very strong emotional payoff. But obviously, the player has to actually care about Elena for this to be effective. And if there's one thing that this game nails with a jackhammer, it's exactly that. Aside from her slimy tendencies, Elena is the quintessential sweet, soft-spoken girl who would never hurt a mosquito. All she wants is to be happy with the person she loves. So of course the game is going to try its hardest to make her miserable. The relationship between Elena and Aaron, aka the player, is the focal point of the experience, and it influences how the game progresses and how the game ends. At the start of the game, Mavda gives you the Oraculos Chain, an ancient treasure that allows the wielder to see the invisible bonds that tie people together. In other words, it's the story excuse for that yellow gauge on the left, which represents the pair's relationship. You can raise it by talking to her, picking the right dialogue choices and giving her some gifts. In short, be a good boy to get the nice fifis, or be an uncaring jerk to screw everything up. And what better way to make my dumb gamer brain get attached to a character than to have them respond to player kindness with useful gameplay rewards? She can expand your inventory if you bring her certain materials, and sometimes she'll give you equipment or make you some food that restores health. She becomes important to the player, not just from the story making you feel pity, but also because she makes your life easier in the towers. But the clock is always ticking, and the curse ain't gonna stop itself, so you can't just leisurely explore the towers unless you want a bad end. The first few towers are short and can be completed in a single trip, but for the rest you have to keep watch of the counter and bring back some flesh from normal enemies to push back the curse and give you more time to find the master. The thing is, that gauge at the bottom left isn't limited to a binary state. The more it rolls out, the more her body shifts back into monster form. It starts out with a squiggly little tumor on her shoulder, but it slowly starts possessing more of her body. And watching that happen is like getting stabbed through the heart. That sweet, innocent girl reduced to a sad and pathetic state of trying to clean the mess of her own body on the floor. Well played, developers. If only you had stopped there. Get back on the red section and the sky darkens, the peaceful music turns into a droning cacophony, and Elena won't be in the living room to greet you with a warm smile. Instead, you see a trail of slime on the floor leading down to the basement, where she is hiding away in shame, crying and lamenting the disgusting blob that she's turning into. You see that? That means you goofed up. I know this is someone's fetish, but holy shit, bro. And at the same time, the more flesh she eats, the more she enjoys it. She's visibly repulsed the first time, even more so because followers of Ios are sworn to be vegetarian or something. But eventually, the necessary becomes routine, and routine becomes pleasure, while the player starts to be the one feeling disgust instead. This leads to Elena having lapses of consciousness, and it rips at her soul. Any momentary slip could cause her to lose control and hurt Aaron. But enough about the waifu. What about our boy Aaron? Dependable guy all around. He slices, he dices, he rips out internal organs and gives them to his girlfriend as a snack. Yum yum. He's a man of few words, who carries some heavy baggage in that pretty little face of his. And he isn't the courageous knight in shiny armor, ready to dive into the depths of hell to save the world. He's a runaway, wanted dead from both sides. One because he's the enemy in this war, and the other because of their election of duty. But in a way, that's what makes him a stronger protagonist than it first appears. He's very shy at the start, but with time he begins to open up. His story is revealed, and his resolve strengthened. He might not have the balls of steel to fight a pointless war, but he will traverse a hellscape of man-eating monsters and rip the innards out of them to save your bacon. It's safe to say that Aaron's support is what gives Elena the willpower to fight on and not succumb to the curse no matter the odds. So, the towers. There's 13 of them, each with a number of challenges to overcome. You have doors to open, puzzles to solve, and enemies to beat up. Oh, and chains. Lots of chains. The statue in the entrance hall indicates how many you still have to destroy to open the door to the master's room. Knowing where to go so you can destroy them isn't a problem, since the chains themselves tell you where to go. They pass through the entire tower, so you can always follow them to the room where the connector is, marked with a distinct door. The real question is, how do you reach that room? It's usually located somewhere that can't be accessed by simply walking there, or maybe something is blocking the passage, and that's where the Oracule's chain comes in. The basic idea is that you point the cursor at your target and bind them with the chain. This lets you swing objects around or throw them into other stuff in order to create a path forward. It can also be used to move towards climbing points in walls, and to trigger switches and pick up items that would otherwise be out of reach. A lot of the game involves maneuvering the environments in some way, from parkour to swinging to platforming, etc. And the game gives the player new ways to use the chain with every tower, so it always stays fresh as you combine your previous knowledge with a new challenge. The last two towers in particular are a highlight. The Dawn and Dusk towers are intertwined with each other and share the same basic layout, but with different obstacles at different locations, so you have to open portals and travel between the two towers to progress. The time limit might also sound frustrating to some people, but I don't think it is. Most of the time anyway. You can frequently find shortcuts that let you easily go back down, and there's a craftable item that instantly warps you back home. Inventory space is also limited, so you're going back down regardless to dump materials, craft items, and refill your medicine. In a way, being forced to go back to the observatory at regular intervals is a natural way to pace the player's progression. Or at least I hope it's intentional, since it makes me sound smart. Speaking of inventory, the game employs a unique equip zone mechanic in which items require a certain amount of blocks to be placed. The zone expands as you gain experience points and level up, and as long as you have enough, you can use any equipment you want at the same time, aside from multiple weapons. However, every single item takes one slot in the inventory, and they are prone to breaking if Aaron takes damage. You can repair them, but it will cost you, and requires going back to the observatory. Whether it's worth cancelling your exploration or just pushing ahead with broken items is up to you. As for combat, Aaron's basic abilities are fairly bog standard. You have a basic combo, a series of charge attacks that you unlock by upgrading the weapon, and you can block and dodge, beat up enemies to earn experience points and level up. There's 4 weapons available, with the sword being your starting one. Later you can find the twin blades that deal multiple hits, a scythe with a wide range of effect, and the explosive stake, which is very powerful but can only be obtained in New Game Plus, so who even cares? What keeps the combat spicy is the Oracle's chain, which is just as important here as it is for exploration. Like with objects, you can latch onto enemies and throw or swing them around, but that's not all. You can target individual body parts, and different enemies will react differently. Some can be tripped by targeting their legs or wings, some can have their armor pulled off, and others can be crippled by ripping out their weapons. You can also double tap to envelop them with the chain to completely stop their movement, or shoot it at a second enemy to link them together and cause attacks on one of them to be replicated on the other. However, the chain gauge will continuously drop, and enemies will be freed if it drops to 0. The trick is to pull it back by applying counterforce, which deals a small amount of damage over time and brings the gauge back up. And the higher it is, the more damage you deal by snapping the chain back to you. This is especially important against the masters, which are built entirely around this mechanic. They can't be damaged with weapons. You must latch onto their weak point using the chain. But obviously they won't just sit still while we rip their guts out. And that's where the challenge comes from. All of them have unique appearances, attacks and movement patterns that must be dealt with. It's clear that this is where a lot of the budget and effort went to, because pretty much all of them are a spectacle to watch, and engaging to fight since they demand precision and careful analysis. The first couple of masters leave their weak point wide open, but most of them require the player to figure out a way to use the chain's mechanics to draw it out, while avoiding their incoming attacks. And while it's not required, the developers make exploration extra rewarding by hiding tips about each master's behavior in documents found throughout their tower. And as they say, knowledge is power. Again, the clock is always ticking, so you are highly encouraged to be aggressive, lest you find your fancy new floor a bit soiled when you get home. Or worse. It's a shame that I can't say the same about combats against regular enemies. The game only has a handful of common enemy types, and eventually they start shrugging off basic strikes and hit really hard, even the little buggers. It's basically abuse charge attacks or die, since enemies are easily stun-locked with those and proper chain usage. It's fun, it's responsive, and the feedback you get from hurting enemies is satisfying. It just needed a little bit more to keep it from decaying into repetition. The camera can also get in the way at times. The fixed position is fine in the vast majority of cases, and it lets the developers keep important landmarks on the screen at all times, which is very important when a lot of the climbing and platforming is dependent on the player knowing where to latch on. But it can cause problems on rare occasion, either because it obscures the player or the enemies, or because it's just too far away. The camera angles can also make it hard to perceive where the player is, so you end up attacking the air, or more commonly, you misjudge a jumping distance, take falling damage and waste time climbing all the way back. That's when the time limit starts getting frustrating. But what is ironic is that I'm actually avoiding some of that by running the game on an emulator rendering at a higher resolution. Remember that Wii games typically run at 480p, which is too little pixels to properly display distant details, and I'd argue that some of the visual effects can also cause readability issues at such a low resolution. The technology itself certainly isn't bad. It's doing a solid amount of stuff for a console with such old specs as the Wii, and a lot of assets have many intricate details. It's just that the technology doesn't get to shine on native hardware. Not being locked to 30 FPS would probably be a decent help too, especially since it's limited to something like 10 FPS when zooming in with the chain, which makes it very tricky to control something that is meant to be precise. There is a 60 FPS code, and I was very tempted to use it, but it causes problems with Aaron's cape and who knows what else. Oh, and the American version has a game-breaking bug. Thanks, Reggie. In conclusion, it's apparent that the developers set their ambitions just a tad too high for the hardware, and likely their budget as well, given that there's a few minor cases of entire rooms being recycled, with only enemies being different. It's kind of tragic that the game more or less remains a Wii exclusive to this day, without a remaster to work around some of its rough edges. Technically, it was also available on the Wii U Virtual Console, but without any enhancements. Gambarion continues to develop games, but have not shown any plans for anything like a sequel or a remaster, and that's a real shame. Pandora's Tower is not a perfect game, but it is a very unique one, and there isn't much else like it out there. Sometimes it's wholesome, sometimes it's squeaky, sometimes it's engaging and frustrating simultaneously. It's a game that demands your attention and dedication to get the most out of it. But the payoff for doing so is colossal.